Okay, so we're going to talk about Grice's cooperative principle. And let's just start with an example of some conversation uh, where we can see uh, the cooperative principle functioning. And what Grice is trying to answer is the question of how is meaning recovered. So let's take a particular context. And these two geezers here are at a lunch. It's, let's say it's a Thursday lunchtime. And they've been given an award, for example. So there's been lunch and there's been alcohol. Maybe they've drank wine. Maybe they drank too much of it. So A says to B, "Are you working this afternoon?" Okay, that is, are you going to work after this award ceremony, this special lunch? And B responds, "I'm going back to the office." What is A to make of B's response? Okay. So if you ask an information question, you're expecting something that conforms to yes and something that conforms to no. So is the response, "I'm going back to the office," a yes to the question about working, or is it a no in terms of working? Okay. So we presume, or A presumes, that B is cooperating in the conversation and what they're saying is relevant to the particular question that is being asked. And what we have to do is, based upon that notion of cooperation, work out what the implicature is. This is Grice's special term that he created himself to suggest what is implied by a particular utterance. And probably we can begin to understand here that the nature of the response, because it doesn't conform to a yes or a no, is suggesting perhaps it's no. Okay? Um, so the person's going back to the office, but they're not going to work because perhaps they've drank a little too much at lunch. Sometimes we use little words to indicate a response is dissonant with an expectation. So you might expect something like, "Are you working this afternoon?" "Well, I'm going back to the office." Okay, and that "well" suggests something that is dissonant, contrary to maybe the expectation of the particular question. Um, Grice distinguishes between what he calls natural meaning and non-natural meaning. So natural meaning is on the level of logical entailment. Um, so if you take a sentence like "the Bobcats beat Miami," what that entails is that the Bobcats scored more points than Miami. And if you take a sentence like "the president was assassinated," it entails that the president is dead. Okay, so this is a logical meaning that's always associated with an expression. So on every occasion when the expression occurs, the meaning occurs. Okay, so that's what he calls natural meaning. What he's interested is in non-natural meaning, which is the same as implicature. Um, so, for example, if we take a particular exchange, the Bobcats are playing OSU. A says, "How did the Bobcats do?" And B says, "The Bobcats won." Okay. What is the implicature? Well, based upon your contextual knowledge here, right, we know that they scored more points than the OSU, okay, the Buckeyes. That's the logical entailment, but what's the implicature? Okay, well, if you know the Bobcats and if you know the Buckeyes and the difference between them, then you probably can understand the implicature that they did really well. Now let's flip the context. Imagine that the Bobcats are playing the linguistics department. Yeah, the linguistics department has a football team. How did the Bobcats do? The Bobcats won. Okay, so now the implicature could be that they didn't do very well. You would expect something like, "Well, of course they won." So this is the area in which Grice is working. Okay. Um, and this is his notion of the cooperative principle. It's a very rational approach to behavior, of trying to understand how we understand each other, and it's based on particular principles of cooperation. So it's a very rational approach to behavior. So Grice says, make your contribution such as is required at the stage at which it occurs by the accepted purpose of the talk exchange in which you're engaged. Okay? It's very a rational appeal to how people behave to cooperate in conversation. Um, he comes up with four particular guiding principles of cooperation. The first one is quantity, and this can be divided into not saying too much and not saying too little. Okay, so in the first one, it's an example of not saying enough. Imagine this situation in the classroom. Maybe there's an Argentinian student, maybe it's an Italian Argentinian student talking to a Korean student. And they're practicing a particular dialogue which practices the have you ever. So Kim says, have you ever eaten spaghetti? And Gabriele says, yes, I have. And then Kim says, what was it like? And then Gabriele responds, it's delicious. Notice the change from the past to the present. Um, the implication, the implicature of Kim's question is this is a one-off event, right? Have you ever eaten frog's legs, for example? And that's probably, maybe you did, but maybe it was just once. But clearly, this is something that's pretty common for Gabriele. So one we would expect, if Gabriele is expecting, um, is cooperating, that when Kim says, have you eaten spaghetti? Gabriele would say, yes, I have, of course. I'm Italian. I eat it all the time. So, not enough information there. So, that, in a sense, is a violation of the maximum of quantity. And we can also say too much. Imagine, you're looking for somebody to have lunch with, and you see your friend and say, hey, have you eaten yet? And your friend says, yes, I have just eaten pork cassoulet with pork confit and winter tomato sauce. Get you. Too much information. Okay. The next maxim by which we cooperate is that of quality, which really means telling the truth. Do not say what you believe to be false. Do not say for what you lack adequate evidence. So A says, would you like a beer? B says, yes, thanks. And A says, so would I. So notice if you make an offer, you express a commitment. It's what we call a commissive in speech act theory. You commit to a course of action. So in a sense, you're lying if you're making the offer. And that is a violation of the maximum quality. The next one is relevance or a relation. Make your contribution relevant. And sometimes it might not be easy to see the relevance. It depends on cultural knowledge. So A says, I ran out of gas, and B says, there's a supermarket on the corner. In American culture, usually when there's a supermarket, there's a gas station. It may not be true in other cultures. So it is relevant. So the expectation is when we cooperate, what we say is relevant. If you're in Athens and you ask the question, do you know where I can find ping pong balls? Then if B responds, try the liquor store, you might scratch your head if you're a stranger in town. But actually, the B is being very relevant. So this is an expectation that is a relevant response. Finally, there's the maximum of manner. And this is a kind of bit of a messy catch-all. Avoid obscurity, avoid ambiguity, be brief. This is an example of one of those annoying calls from telemarketers who want to ask you how your day is going before they try and persuade you to buy whatever they're selling. Be orderly. They washed and went to bed, not they went to bed and washed. So that's a kind of a pretty catch-all, messy category. But these are the ways that Grice believes that we cooperate together. And through this cooperation, we're able to understand, we're able to recover the meaning of utterances. There are two ways that we can contravene these particular maxims, are what are called flouting and violating. And there's a kind of a difference. It's not always easy to know the difference between these. Well, let's see if we can tease out some of the difference here. We saw that there was a violation there. If you offer somebody something, would you like some wine? And you say yes, and the other person says, well, so would I. That's a violation of the maximum equality. Um, when we flout, it's still clearly understood what the utterance is doing. We understood that we're not being lied to or cheated to, but there's some kind of way that it is not true, and we have a recognition it's not true. So let's look at some examples, and these are pretty common examples. For example, use of hyperbole, and this is the flouting of quality. It's freezing in here. Well, it's not freezing, it's just very cold. Can I have a sip of your wine? That's usually what my wife often says, and I know I have to be careful because she's not going to take a sip. She's going to take a big gulp, right? It's hyperbole. I won't be a second. Well, of course you'll be a second. You'll be several seconds. No one can be that quick. I didn't sleep a wink last night. Well, you must have closed your eyes for some time, right? So these are exaggerations, which really can be seen as contradicting the maximum equality, but we understand them as not as violations, but as flouting, because we understand what is trying to be conveyed here, but the implicature that's being conveyed by this flouting. We can do it with metaphor. It's boiling in here. He kicked the bucket. He's a pig. She's an angel. They're not actually pigs and they're not actually angels, right? We can flout quality in the sense of irony, which is a kind of mock politeness or a friendly way of being offensive. Thanks, I really like eating with a broken knife. Or, I really appreciate you leaving the door open. I like a nice Arctic wind. It's a little difficult to distinguish irony from sarcasm. Why don't you try yelling a little louder so all the neighbors can hear? The distinction there would be that irony is a mock politeness, where there's no suggestion of being polite with sarcasm. And another one is banter, which is an offensive way of being friendly, and it's mock impoliteness, okay? I hate you. You can wear anything, right? Um, they're fantastically skinny. Okay, let's look at some other examples. We've seen this notice in the Village Bakery before. Again, it's a flouting of the maximum of quality. It actually achieves the speech act of a directive, asking people not to do something. But clearly, it's not true. Unsupervised children will be given caffeine, candy, and a kitten. So please take care of your bundle of joy. So those are notions of flouting. When we get to violating, what we have is something that we are not aware of, right? Okay. We can't see that the person is actually using hyperbole or is using exaggeration. We just take it as being true. We can't see that it is a deception. So, for example, are you dating anybody? I'm not dating any men at the moment. Okay. Notice we could give some clues as to what's going on there, which would make it less of a violation. Are you dating anybody? No, I'm not dating any men at the moment. Okay, maybe they're dating women, other women. Here's a classic example of how the notion the maximum equality is violated in real situations. And it's good to remember when we talk about the cooperative principle that there are particular scenes of struggle, of conflict, in which the cooperative principle doesn't really exist. This is an extract taken from a particular very historic occasion in American judicial history or Senate history. This is uh, uh, a very fraught nomination battle in which Judge Thomas, was nominated for the Supreme Court, and there was a lot of evidence brought by his co-worker at the time, Anita Hill, who accused him of sexual harassment. Um, Alan Simpson was a Republican. It was a Republican nomination by George Herbert Bush, the president at the time, and so Simpson is defending Thomas and attacking Anita Hill's evidence against Thomas. So, and now I really am getting stuff over the transom about Professor Hill. I've got letters hanging out of my pocket. I've got faxes. I've got statements from her former law professors, statements from people who know her, statements from Tulsa, Oklahoma, saying, watch out for this woman. So we had 104 days to go into Miss Hill and find out about her character, her background, her proclivities, and all the rest. I'd feel a lot better about this. And I'm talking about the stuff I'm getting from women in America who are sending me things, and especially women in Oklahoma. Well, that'll all become public. Well, in fact, it never did become public because he didn't have the evidence, right? But very subtly, he was able to present whatever evidence he had got. Notice how he begins with this interesting phrase, over the transom. A transom is a window above a door, and if you wanted to secretly pass a message to somebody, you could just throw it through the transom. So there's the notion of stealth going on here. I've got letters hanging out of my pocket. What could that be? If you had 2 letters hanging out of your pockets, then that would be fine, right? Yeah. Um, um, he's trying to give the impression he's got a lot of letters, okay? But you could even just have, and you could actually even just have one in a sense. I've got faxes. Are the faxes the same as the letters, or are they different? And how many faxes? 2. I've got statements from her former law professors. Is a statement different to what's in the fax or what's in the letter? Statements from people who know her. Is that the same person? A law professor and a person who knows her? Could be the same person. Statements from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which could be what we've just referred to, the law professor, the people who know her. Okay, saying watch out for this woman. Notice watch out for this woman is ambiguous between watch out for this woman. She's really good. She's going to go places. Or watch out for this woman. Beware, she's dangerous. So if we had 104 days to go into Miss Hill and find about her character, her background, her proclivities. Okay, there's a very loaded word. Proclivities is usually used with reference to sexual preferences and all the rest. I'd feel a lot better about this. And I'm talking about the stuff I'm getting from women in America. So women in America, is that different from what has been mentioned before? The law professor could be a woman, right? Who are sending me things, especially women in Oklahoma. So it could be a female law professor in Oklahoma that sent a letter, or there are 2 letters. Right? So what it amounts to is a huge, great exaggeration, huge, great use of hyperbole, although you cannot tell. So it's a violation of the principle of the maxim of quality. You can often see how we take into consideration these particular maxims by the use of particular hedges and intensifiers. If you look at the hedges, all I know is that smoking damages your health, so you're conforming to the maximum of quantity. They say smoking damages your health, which is a conforming to the maximum of quality because you're just reporting what they say. Okay, you don't know if it's true or not. I don't know if this is relevant, but smoking damages your health, maximum relation. I don't want to go on about this, but smoking damages your health. And that could refer to the maximum of mana, be brief. And then if you look at intensifiers, we also get some interesting use of language. Smoking damages your health, and that's all there is to it, okay, in terms of quantity. Smoking damages your health for sure, okay, so that expressing your belief in it in terms of quality. The point is conforming to the maximum of relevance, and put plainly, smoking damages your health, which is conforming to the maxim of manner. So these are kinds of ways, clues in which we use language, suggest that these particular maxims do exist, and we are trying to conform to them and cooperate in our interactions. Grace has tried to map the difference between natural and non-natural language into a larger framework. So he talked about firstly, if you talk about what's conveyed by an utterance, then we have what is logically entailed, and we just looked at some of those things, and we have what is implicated. And then he broke down what is implicated into what he called conventional and conversational implicature, and he broke down the conversational implicature into generalized and particularized. So let's see some examples of that. So if you take the utterance, some Bobcats fans are actually sane, well, there's an entailment that a number of Bobcat fans are in reality sane, right? That's a logical entailment. So let's look at the conventional implicature. There's a conventional implicature followed by actually. It's hard to, which really means it's hard to believe that some Bobcat fans are sane. You get the same with the word even. There's a party after. Even professors are invited. And the suggestion is you wouldn't expect this, but it's true. Then there are generalized conversational implicatures, and these are expressed here by the word some, which is really part of a larger group of what are called scalar implicatures. That is, not all Bobcat fans are sane. And then finally, we get a particularized conversational implicature, right, which can only be understood in the particular context. And that is, I'm not the pitiable idiot you think I am, right? Because you have to know something about the Bobcats and their usual lack of winning ways. Okay, so if we look a little bit more closely at that, if we look at conventional implicature, the inferences that are attached by convention to particular lexical items and expressions. So it's actually raining, there's an entailment in reality, and the implicature is this is hard to believe. And if we look at that word even linguists get the blues, there's an entailment in addition to other people, but also an implicature. It's low on the scale of expectability. We wouldn't expect linguists to get the blues, would we? No, of course not. So looking at those particular scalar implicatures that we looked at before, these are the generalized conversational implicatures. There is a kind of a range. So if you look at the one that going from all to none, certain to possible, will to might, succeed to want to. And so if we start off at one part of that scale, for example, we start off with some, then that can also cover everything to the left of it. So imagine this, some children believe in Santa Claus. The implicature is not all, okay, but we can cancel it. We can say, in fact, all children do. That might be Tom at the door. The implicature is not must be, but you can cancel it. In fact, it must be. Nigel has 14 children. The implicature is Nigel has only 14 children, but you can cancel it. In fact, he has 20 children. Imagine a situation where Nigel is going on holiday, and he's taking his 20 children to Disney World, right? And he gets to the place where you buy the tickets, and or it says something like families with 3 children um, get a special discount. Okay, right? So Nigel says, "Hey, I've got 3 children. Can I have the discount? In fact, I've got 20 children." Okay, so these are what are called scalar implicatures, what Grice calls generalized conversational implicatures. So there they are, generalized implicatures, some, not all, etc. And the same inferences are drawn whatever the context. And then we have particularized implicatures. I'd like a drink. If you look at the example at the top there, some people offer you a drink when you visit them. So some is a generalized conversational implicature. A drink is particularized. What does a drink mean? Okay. Um, it depends on the context, whether it's an alcoholic drink or a soft drink or something like that. So that is dependent upon context. Okay, so what we've done is talked about the notion of implicature. We talked about the notion of cooperation, of the notion of maxims, and we've looked briefly at Grice's framework for looking at natural and non-natural language. If we look at some of the problems with the cooperative principle, when we'll notice, and we've already seen this in terms of the political speech by Senator Alan Simpson, that we don't always seek to cooperate. We may seek to manipulate, and that depends on the particular context. In a political context, there's lots and lots of manipulation. Even in casual conversation, there's potentially a lot of manipulation, although perhaps a lot more cooperation. And in that sense, it ignores the nature of relationships in terms of inequalities, social roles, and relationships. And that's an essential part of any interaction. And that will affect the kinds of meanings that we attribute to speakers in particular contexts. Okay? And we already talked a little bit about that in the sense of the use of a phrase like do you want to do something as a request. Notice you can say that to a peer, and you can say that to somebody of lower status, okay, like professor to student. Do you want to say that again? Do you want to write that again? But notice you can't use it going up to a superior or higher status person. Student can't say really to the teacher, do you want to say that again, please? Right? It would be more likely to say, would you please say that again? Right? You might consider whether maxims are culture specific. I tend to think that they're not culture specific. That this tends to be a universal attempt to explain cooperation, but where they are culturally different is in the notion of flouting and violation. What constitutes flouting in one society may be a violation in another society. Okay, flouting is always seen as positive. Is that necessarily the case? Some cultures hate sarcasm, for example. And what we do have is a set of overlaps of the maxims. It's not always easy to know which maxim is being flouted or violated, okay? Especially that large category of the maxim of manner,